Welcome to the Non-Obvious Insights Show. Every week we take an in-depth look at the most interesting and underappreciated stories of the week and talk about why they matter. Let's get started. Happy Thursday, Non-Obvious Nation. It's time for a non-obvious look at the most fascinating stories of the week, and I am your host, Rohit Bhargava, and I am so excited to share with you the most interesting stories of the week. And I am on a mission to try and find those stories every week and share them with you, and I'm so excited to do that today. And last week, we had a really interesting group of stories that we talked about. We shared a couple of different stories, and the first one was really interesting. It was all about this idea that millennials are let me find it here for a second. Industries that millennials were killing and then saving. So we had a bunch of industries like American cheese and just like lots of interesting different categories that millennials were that people thought were dead, and then people started coming back to them, and so it was just really interesting because I thought, it was just this category of napkins, cheese, golf, really, really cool stuff. And this week, I've got a bunch more stories to share with you, and we're going to jump into those. I'm really excited about the stories that we've got. It's been kind of an interesting week. If you read my email, one of the things that you probably saw is that I had a story that kind of made me angry. And so I'm going to share a little bit about that and just why it made me angry. And we're going to talk about an unusual commencement speech. There's a really fascinating story about that. Business school grads, why brands are moving from Instagram to TikTok. And just some more stories that I didn't share in my email, and we're going to talk about those as well. So just a reminder, we are live streaming now to Facebook, to YouTube. And if you have a comment or a question, or if you wanted to just share some feedback while we're talking, feel free to do that on the live stream. For those of you who are watching on replay, thank you so much for watching on replay. Again, you can watch this show live every Thursday at noon, and we'll be sharing the most interesting stories of the week, or you can grab it on replay either on Facebook or on YouTube. Finally, the links that I'm sharing for all the stories that I'm sharing, the links will be posted in the description. So you can read any of those stories that you are interested in. You can read the full stories with those links, and we're going to post all of those as we continue to go. So let's get started with the first story of the week. And the first story of the week was one that I have to say, when I read it, I mean, look, I'm a guy who usually doesn't get angry with stuff, but this story made me angry. And it made me angry because it was about a research report that Facebook had conducted and then kind of buried 2 years ago. And the whole report was about how Facebook knew and understood how much division they were creating through their platform, and yet they didn't do anything about it. And I see this all the time in Facebook in terms of the stories that get promoted, how they seem designed to make us angry and to divide us. I actually wrote about it. I had a trend, I think it was like 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, that I called manipulated outrage. And that's kind of what Facebook does. Like, it manipulates us to feel angry. And as I read this story, I just I felt like it was this kind of perfect, understandable storm of what had happened on Facebook. And one of the pieces that they talked about in the story was just this philosophical choice that it seems like the leadership at Facebook, and particularly Mark Zuckerberg, made to say, we stand behind free speech. And that's kind of been their defense. Everything is all about free speech. We want people to be able to say what they want. And see, the problem with that is that Facebook doesn't just allow people to have free speech. It promotes certain types of things that people find sensational. And so it gives them a platform to go viral. And that's not the same as free speech. Like, letting people say what they want is one thing, but like taking these fringe opinions and like promoting them and making them huge, That's the problem. And this story really spotlighted that, and so it struck home for me. And I was really angry about it. And I kind of joked in my email that I'm so angry I'll probably post the article on Facebook, which I usually don't do. I usually don't share stories through Facebook. I use it now just more to connect with friends and family and people like that. So yeah, that one did get me angry for sure. The second story that I wrote about in the email was kind of two stories. It was these two op-eds from the New York Times, and one of them focused on how all of our kids are probably sleeping later now, and how that might not be a bad thing. That maybe they were waking up too early and being sleep deprived, and how much kids need sleep. And the other story was about how there's a couple of schools, University of California, and perhaps others will follow, that are saying we're not going to require the SAT or the ACT test anymore. And all this science behind that says that those tests, a lot of times, like, they unfairly disadvantage students that come from different backgrounds because they don't test as well in standardized tests. And it doesn't really reflect how your intelligence is. Those stories together just, to me, demonstrated this big conversation that's happening right now. And in fact, we did a virtual summit all about it last week on the future of learning. But this topic is just a huge one that continues to come out through media. People are talking about it because it's really personal for most of us. I mean, we have our kids are at home, they're doing homeschooling, they're learning how to communicate with one another in different ways, and get educated in different ways. And a lot of people believe, myself included, that when the lockdowns end and when schools reopen, it's not just going to go back to the way that it was. Things are going to change. And so that topic continues to get a lot of play. It continues to get a lot of attention. And that was really what these kind of focused on. The next story was kind of a much more of a lighthearted one, and it was about how Formula One racing had drivers who were competing against each other in video games. And this has become like really common. Like, you're getting lots of these leagues having like professional hockey players playing against one another in video games, or NFL players doing the same thing. And I remember thinking when I first watched this that probably some of them aren't going to be very good at these video games, and they're really competitive people. I mean, professional athletes are just competitive people. So someone at some point is going to find someone else to compete for them. And that's in fact what this guy did. He found someone else to compete for him, and he basically got a ringer. And it was just like comically bad how crap the way that he did it was. I mean, I don't know if you can see the picture here, but there was a picture where he's got like him, it's supposed to be him playing, but like his microphone's kind of like almost covering his face, but it's not really. And it's just like so badly done. And then he came back and he's like, yeah, it was all a prank. I was trying to do a joke. And it was just a stupid story, but really interesting because it got me thinking about, like, in this virtual sense where we're communicating with one another and representing ourselves, what are those cases where maybe we bring in someone to make us look better? Like, is this going to be something that we do, or as individuals do, or other people do? Is it something to watch? Just like bringing in ringers to like do the test for us, or to, communicate for us. Maybe it's not just the professional athletes. So it's something that I'm keeping my eye on, but it was just an interesting story. This next one that really stood out for me was a business. He's listed here as a business critic. I mean, I've read the work of Anand Giridharadas before, and he's just a really, really interesting and smart individual who thinks a little bit differently. I mean, his book Winners Take All was all about how there's a selfish side to all of these billionaires who are giving money to try and change the world, and pledging 90% of their wealth or whatever it is. But a lot of these problems have been created by business as well. And one of the quotes that he had from this kind of 8-minute long open letter to business graduates / commencement speech, which is kind of what the video is, was where this pandemic has spread, an equally infectious idea has followed, that the people most capable of fixing our societies are business-minded people. And we see that all over the place in many different places. And I just thought it was a unique take on what business graduates should be thinking about versus what they're taught in business school. And look, I went to business school too, and a lot of what we learn is really based on success, profit metrics, stakeholder value, those sorts of things. And really what he's advocating is we need to have more focus on the people. And that's something that I have certainly written about and talked about in the past. And it's an important message. And the way that he kind of gets this across was just a uniquely done thing. So I highly recommend watching that video. The link, again, will be posted in the show notes. So you'll be able to just go to the link and watch the full video. It's only 8 minutes long, so it's not like super long. The next story that I thought was something that I'd been tracking for a while was all of these companies trying to get plant-based bottles and replace all of the plastic bottles. And what I thought was what kind of awakened my imagination in this story was not so much the fact that they were doing it. I mean, this has been around for some time, and yeah, the visuals are really cool, and it's great to hear that they're implementing it by 2023, according to the article. What was more kind of compelling for me was the idea that if this succeeds, if we do get people to buy beer out of plant bottles, if we do get this to have widespread adoption, it's going to need storytellers. It's going to need marketers to really promote it and get it out there. And with a lot of these types of world-changing innovations, like one of my greatest fears as a marketing guy and as a storyteller is that world-changing innovation's already being invented somewhere by someone who isn't able to convince anyone to listen to them, because they're not necessarily going to be a great communicator. They might be a great inventor. They might be a great scientist. They might be a really, really genius level individual, but without that person to help them tell the story, it doesn't live and it doesn't change the world the way it should. So that's what I think people who do marketing and people who are storytellers, like that's the value I think we have to give, which is finding those types of stories and helping them get the audience that they deserve and helping them get out there. And so like, that's my little personal marketing guy soapbox, which is like, if we can do that, like, that'd be really powerful. Like, that'd be really amazing to be able to do that. So that story just got me thinking about it. This next one was all about how there's an ignored category that many marketers are not paying attention to. And it's the Asian American and Asian Pacific Islander category. And it's funny that they're all kind of lumped together, that like Indians, Chinese, Koreans, Pacific Islanders, like we're all one category, according to marketing demographic studies. But what the biggest problem here, I think, is that although media has started to change and we're seeing more representation with different types of characters, and I've written about that in the past and talked about like Lily Singh and her having a talk show and that, just all of these things that are just great. Marketing dollars and marketing strategy is lagging behind that. And one of the reasons I think for that is because there aren't as many people of Asian American background, people like me who do go into that field, who do choose to go into marketing and advertising. And I remember this was a big topic back when I was in my agency days, and we would have these gatherings of diverse people who worked in the agency, and there weren't always that many of us, even in a huge agency. And it was a big challenge, because if we don't have anyone who thinks that way, if you don't have the diversity of background and race in the people making the marketing decisions, that factors through to where the money gets spent. And so this was my kind of thought that we should encourage more Asian Americans. This is not just my selfish thought. This is just like what I think. Maybe it is my selfish thought, actually, but I think more Asian Americans should consider marketing as a career path, because that leads them towards that. So, wow, this week's episode is turning into my little pep talk for marketing. Wow. I mean, if you're in marketing, you're probably loving this, but I didn't intend it to go that way. But sometimes the stories just lead you where they lead you. So that ended up being the thing. Who knew, right? Oh, sorry, that was a thing. So those were the stories that I discovered this past week and shared in my email. you're watching the Non-Obvious Insights show, where I take you behind the stories of the week that I share in my weekly email, but I also give you insight into the new stories that I did not include in my email. And so if you're enjoying these stories, definitely subscribe to my email newsletter. Come here every Thursday to watch the YouTube show and learn about the backstory behind the stories. And also connect with me on Twitter, connect with me through email. You can send me an email just if you want to connect directly at any time. I would love to chat with you. I'd love to hear from you. And if this sparks any thoughts or if this sparks any comments for you, feel free to just shoot me a comment or anything like that, and I'll be happy to talk about it. So I see one here from Catherine. You work with a nonprofit. We're working to help high school and college students during the pandemic. That is amazing. I love that. And actually, I was just having a conversation with somebody. Thanks, Catherine. I was just having a conversation with somebody about how one of the things that we've got to help these students think through is what their summer plan is going to be, because a lot of internships fell through. And so how do we help them replace that? Because the opportunity of getting all that mentorship is just like amazing, and we've got to find a way to help them have that productive summer, even if they can't have the internships. So yeah, definitely a big deal. Ruhi, thanks for watching. Yes, we're in solidarity with the South Asians in marketing. I knew you'd be on board with that. So let's start recruiting some more. Maybe we should give them internships. Maybe that's the way to do it, right? Erno, good to see you, my friend. And Zach, good to see you too, man. Thanks for tuning in. I really appreciate you guys. And Asokan, thanks for jumping in from India. I mean, I love that we have so many people from so many different places. We've got Boston, we've got Brooklyn, we've got India. Erna, I don't even remember where you are, but I think maybe Denmark. I can't recall, so maybe you'll correct me and remind me. But anyway, love the interaction. Thank you for jumping in, sharing comments. Let's keep rolling. Netherlands. Yes, Netherlands. Sorry. Thank you for reminding me. So let's jump into the next round of stories. And these are the ones that I did not actually write about, but that I still wanted to share with you. Some more fascinating stories. This is the bonus content portion of the weekly show. So this is the behind the scenes bonus side. This story really captured my attention because Japan apparently has been beating, as the battle metaphors continue for the coronavirus, it's been beating coronavirus without lockdowns or mass testing. And the question is how, and lots of people had different philosophies or kind of guesses for why. I mean, one of the guesses I saw even was the idea that perhaps spoken Japanese doesn't involve quite as much of kind of spit spray languages, which, you know, I mean, some of these things are pretty far-fetched, but the one thing that I really thought that we could all learn from, and this wasn't just a coronavirus lesson, to me this was much more of like a communications lesson, was that the way that the government communicated was with what they called the 3 C's. And for them, it was the 3 C's were the things to avoid: closed spaces, crowded spaces, and close contact settings. And I just thought that was like a really simple, easy to understand way to clearly tell people what they should avoid, instead of just going out and saying, well, we're just going to let anyone close anything. We should just close certain places, and not really explaining the logic behind it. And to me, this was just one of those basic leadership principles of, if you want people to follow your lead, they need to understand the why behind it. And if you don't take the time to give them the why, then they sit there thinking, well, it's not logical. Like, why are, for example, beaches closed when there's so much space, but I can still go to a grocery store? And whether you, I mean, this is not about like wearing masks or not wearing masks or being kind of those, like, you know, being crazy about this. This is about just logic. Like, does what I'm being asked to do make logical sense? And there are a lot of people who need that logic, or otherwise they say, well, screw you, I'm just going to do what I want. And that's kind of the problem that we've had, I think, here in America, that the sentiment of screw you, I'm going to do what I want, is stronger because no one's really explained to them why they should even care about this in a way that makes sense. And we need more simple communication to be able to do that. And I thought that that's what, in this case, Japan seemed to have done really, really well. This was another kind of interesting thing that I saw throughout the week. And I wanted to share these with you because, not because I want to get political, but because I wanted to share the way that the same story is covered through multiple media outlets. And what you see in these headlines is really, really fascinating in terms of, there's one headline, I mean, from Al Jazeera, and then the story, by the way, was that Trump was tweeting as he usually does, and Twitter, for the first time ever, issued one of those misleading claim warnings on his tweet. So this was a big story. Many of you probably saw it. It's not necessarily non-obvious or underappreciated that the story was out there. But what's interesting is all of these different ways that people are describing it. So on Al Jazeera, it says there's no sanctions. They're focusing on why weren't there sanctions, right? On another platform, it was Trump lashing out, and that was the story. On Fox News, it was, Twitter puts the label "despite experts who believe Trump or who support Trump," right? And the picture that all of these paint, I think, is a good lesson for how maybe we can consume a story like this, because just the fact that I'm going out and trying to find these different headlines and different points of view gives me more perspective than just reading this in one place and feeling really angry about it. And that practice is a big part of what I try and teach to people when I'm doing these workshops and when I'm doing these talks and I'm sharing this idea of being a non-obvious thinker. It's like, what does that mean? Well, part of it means like finding the same story in multiple different sources, both inside and outside the US, from this side, from that side, so that you can decide for yourself what it all means. And this was one of those examples where I thought getting all these different stories just gave me perspective on like, what does this mean? What is this? What is the actual story here? And I think that's important for us to just consider how we think about that. This one was much more of I kind of go back from heavy / political to like more lighthearted stories just to give some variety. This one from Popular Science I thought was just a fun story about how zoos and aquariums are letting their animals go on adventures during the shutdown and letting them interact with one another, and sometimes in kind of relatively unnatural ways, right? I mean, here's a penguin hanging out with a crocodile separated by glass, obviously, but that kind of thinking of just let's let our animals kind of bond with one another, because what's happened in a lot of these zoos that I was reading about is a lot of the animals are just, they're used to having people around, and now that there's no people around, they're getting lonely, they're getting affected by that. And so maybe they can keep each other company. And it was, I mean, zoos with videos of animals hanging out with one another, I mean, that's like, yeah, we can't travel, but like I would watch that. It's just fun, and it's interesting, and it's unique, and it's non-obvious. And so that was kind of the story there that I thought was worth sharing, just the sense of animals getting a chance to have an adventure and do something different. This next story about how Google removed millions of negative TikTok reviews, this was really eye-opening on a couple of different fronts. And one of the main ways that it was eye-opening was that the backlash in terms of people posting racist comments really awakened a lot of backlash in India. And the scale of India is something that I think a lot of us who aren't in India, like we just don't appreciate. I mean, I remember reading about Amitabh Bachchan, who's a famous Bollywood actor. And when he first joined Facebook, I think that I don't remember the exact number, but I think it took him like to reach his first 1 million followers, took him like 7 minutes. Because 1 million people in India, a country of 1 billion people, is not really, ratio-wise, all that much. And so what ended up happening in this TikTok situation is there was such a huge backlash in India that millions of people posted negative 0 or 1-star reviews, and TikTok's app rating in the store tanked from like a 4.2 or 4 point something to a 1.2 because of all these people overnight kind of changing their voting negatively. and just demonstrated that some of these systems that we use, whether it's like Amazon reviews or reviews of an app or any of these kind of systems, when you get such a huge population of people, like the people from India, all kind of doing something at one time, it's a scale that we're not generally used to here. And it's really, really fascinating because it is an opportunity, but it's also a danger, as TikTok found out in this case. And so I thought that was just kind of a underappreciated story in that sense. All right. This was kind of related to the TikTok thing, but a different story about how the style of content that's created on Instagram versus TikTok is leading brands away from Instagram and more towards TikTok. And what I mean by that, and what this story talked about, was just that on Instagram, a lot of the content, whether it's celebrity content or Instagram influencers, is all about, call it the good life. Being in a resort, being surrounded by amazing, beautiful people, new clothes, new bags, all of the stuff that is kind of that good life stuff. And the problem is right now, that's a hard thing for people to really be inspired by, because we're feeling the pinch. A lot of people have been furloughed or have lost their jobs. And it just seems like an inappropriate message. Whereas TikTok is a lot more content by people who maybe aren't as much of celebrities. They're more genuine, more down to earth, more entertaining versus the good life stuff. And brands are noticing, and they're moving dollars from one platform to another. And so this story kind of looks at that from the inside and says, well, this is really kind of maybe a broader cultural trend that's being painted as a picture inside of this one little thing. And that's why it was interesting. The next story that I was reading, and it got me thinking, was J.K. Rowling deciding that her next book is going to be published for free. But not just that, but she's actually looking for children to do illustrations that would be featured in the book. And as an author and as an engagement type a person who kind of looks at these types of stories, I just thought it was like a really, really brilliant way for someone like her to just get deep levels of engagement and get buy-in from people and promote this new book. And she's done a lot just from her background in terms of making her books available for education for schools without requiring them to pay. There was just a story, I think a couple weeks ago, that I shared about how she made the Harry Potter books free for certain groups, like educational groups, to use in schools without having to pay anything. So like really, really positive stuff that she's been doing. And I just thought that was a great, great story. And this one was just the last one that I wanted to share because it was just so unusual, and I loved the headline of it. So this was a book that came out last year from someone who basically joined a miming orchestra cult. So it was a traveling orchestra, and she was a violinist, but she would fake play while they would play the song of the orchestra, and the orchestra would perform all over the world. And she wrote a book about this miming orchestra, and the story that was spotlighting it had this amazing headline. They called it Milli Violini. And if you're old enough to remember Milli Vanilli, you might remember this duo of these twins who were, I think they were twins, and they were caught lip syncing, and they didn't actually perform their songs. And I remember I had the cassette tape of Milli Vanilli, and I got this note somehow that said, if you want to return your cassette tape, you can get a refund for what you spent on the Milli Vanilli cassette. And I ended up keeping it, but that was just like that whole memory kind of transposed on top of this like mime orchestra, which is already just kind of an unusual thing. Really captured my attention. So this was just a book that's now on my reading list as a result of this. And I just thought it would be a fun thing to share. And also probably one of the features that we may add to this weekly show is talking about the backlist of books and maybe some books that you might want to read that are unusual, non-obvious, not the latest editions that just came out. So those are the non-obvious stories of the week. I am really, really glad that you joined us for that. If you saw my South by Southwest session that was filmed a week and a half ago. It's now available online, so you can go and check that out. You can watch it live on the South by Southwest site. And also this week, my new book, which many of you know about, The Non-Obvious Guide to Virtual Meetings, was just published in print. So now it's available in print. You can order it on anywhere you buy books. So on Amazon or bookshop.org, which is now my favorite place to send people because it supports independent booksellers. You can get the book on both of those platforms. So that book is now available. So you can watch the South by Southwest talk. You can see, you can get the book in print. It's funny, right before my talk today, I just got a copy of the book because I usually order my own book just to see when it arrives. So the book actually came for me, and then the doorbell rang, and it was like literally 5 minutes before this. So how's that for perfect timing? Pretty good, right? So thank you for joining me on this edition of the Non-Obvious Insights Show. I hope the stories were interesting. I appreciate your time and your attention. And remember to always stay non-obvious.